Hello, everyone. It's Steve with Aptera Owners Club. As you guys know, Aptera has two CEOs that they call themselves co-CEOs. And until I started following Aptera, I had never heard the term co-CEO before. And I always thought it was a little bit of a cop-out that there were two CEOs and they call themselves co-CEOs. So there's Chris Anthony and Steve Fambro. I just thought they couldn't make up their minds, so they decided, well, we both kind of helped founded this thing, and we can't decide who's going to lead this thing, so we'll both call ourselves co-CEOs, which I thought was sort of a made-up term, and that it was unique to Aptera. Turns out I'm completely wrong. And I also thought that there were lots of disadvantages to having co-CEOs, like no one knows who's really in charge. There's no real decision maker. There's not really a leader. But again, I was totally wrong about that. And the reason I figured that out is there was a Freakonomics podcast. This is one of the podcasts I like listening to. Again, I've told you guys I bike to work every day, and that leaves a lot of time to listen to stuff. So I love listening to podcasts while I'm biking. Don't worry, I put the ear pod in just the right ear so I can use my left ear to listen for traffic. So I'm safe. But anyways, there is this podcast called Freakonomics, and they had this episode several weeks ago called "Are Two CEOs Better Than One?" And if you want to know more about it, I recommend you just go listen to this podcast. They're going to do a much better job than I'm about to do, but I'm just going to give you the short Cliff Notes version of why two CEOs are better than one. They interviewed this guy, and the guy that they interviewed on that podcast wrote this Harvard Business Review article called "Is It Time to Consider Co-CEOs?" His name is Mark Feigen. He is a CEO consultant. CEOs come to him to get advice. And basically, they were saying, the old saying is that two heads are better than one. And for a long time, the prevailing wisdom is that every company needs to be led by a single strong leader. And they looked at over 2,200 companies listed in the S&P 1200 and the Russell 1000 from 1996 to 2020. And they found out that fewer than 100 of them were led by co-CEOs. So co-CEOs do happen outside of Aptera. I did not realize that. Of course, if I would have thought about it a little bit more, it would make sense. I mean, they can't be the only company doing this, but they are in the vast minority. So only less than 100 out of 2,000 companies were led by co-CEOs. And they noticed that many of them, especially in times of stress, performed very poorly, the ones with co-CEOs. Among them were there's like Chipotle, SAP, and Research in Motion. They are the company that made BlackBerry, and you know how well BlackBerry did. They did not do well. So they thought, well, of course this is it. Having two decision makers causes conflicts and confusion. No one is in charge. It causes inconsistency, and they can't make decisions. And Marvin Bauer famously warned Goldman Sachs that power sharing never works. Except it does. What they found out is they took a look at the performance of these 87 public companies between 1996 and 2020 that had co-CEOs, and they compared their performance to increasing shareholder value compared to the other 2,000 companies. So obviously the sample sizes are somewhat skewed, but there's a big enough sample size that I think that they can make reasonable conclusions from their analysis. And what they said is that the co-CEO companies produced about an annual shareholder return of 9.5% versus 6.9% for single CEO companies. That is an increase of about 40% in increase of shareholder value. So that's huge. And what they found out is that there's a lot of advantages to having co-CEOs. What they do is they can bring diverse competencies. And when I looked at this and heard about this, it seems to fit perfectly with what Aptera is doing, what Steve and Chris are doing at Aptera. You can tell. I've met Chris a couple of times and talked to him a lot. I've never really had the pleasure of talking to Steve. And Steve, if you want to have an interview with me, please let me know. I'd love to talk to you. But it looks like Steve and Chris have somewhat different strengths and different weaknesses, and they're better at different things. So they have different competencies, and they're very complementary to each other. They can form a left brain, right brain partnership. I think that's happening. One CEO can focus on technology-driven transformation, and while the other attends to more traditional aspects of business, such as marketing, finance, and operations. And I think this is what's happening. I think that Steve Fambro is probably more of the technology and engineering side of the thing, and Chris Anthony's more of the marketing, business, finance, and operations type of guy on this. And so that's what's going. And they can lean on each other. And there are ways that if they trust each other, they can bounce ideas of each other. They don't make rash decisions. And like in many cases, two heads are better than one. So this article talks about what are the key factors for success in a co-CEO run company. You have to have willing participants. That means you can't be like one guy wants to be CEO and he grudgingly accepts the other guy as the co-CEO. They both have to like respect each other and know that, yeah, we want to be partners and co-CEOs in this thing. And then it works. And I get the impression that that is what's happening. They have to have complementary skill sets. So like if both of them are good at the same things and bad at the same things, that's probably not as helpful. But that definitely seems like Chris and Steve have complementary skill sets. They are different personality wise and different skill set wise in what they're doing. So they have clear responsibilities and decision rights. And I can't speak to that, but it seems like they've got that working. They have mechanisms for conflict resolution. Obviously, they're not going to agree on everything, and you have to have good mechanisms for figuring out how to disagree. And what's funny is if you listen to the podcast, they were talking about how being a good co-CEO is like having a marriage, but they said that in many ways it's much easier than a marriage, obviously, because marriage is very hard. And they were saying that, oh, they interviewed a lot of co-CEOs and they're like, oh yeah, we wish our marriages were as well working as our CEO relationship is. And obviously, so it seems like that relationship works a lot easier in many cases because it's kind of a work relationship and there's not as much like baggage attached to it, I guess. Appearance of unity. So they have to, even if they're not united in the decisions, they have to be able to project that they are united in their decisions to the outside world and to their employees. And then they most have to be accountable for the decision. They can't say, oh yeah, well, I'm not accountable to that because that was the other guy's decision, not my decision. And they have to have support of the board, which I think is true because the board is basically them and a few other guys. And then shared values. I think that's very clear that they have shared values and a vision for the company and an exit strategy. So I don't know if they have that, but that's something that they need to have. And so to summarize, what are the benefits? So the disadvantages are no one knows who the boss is. There is some potential for ego issues. Like one guy wants to really be the CEO. And then high potential for multiple marching orders. So like if you don't give consistent directives and one guy gives one directive and the other guy gives another directive, it's confusing for everyone. But here's the advantages. And this makes a lot of sense. Twice the number of CEOs to visit with customers, prospects, and partners. I think this is especially important for Aptera because when they are going to go talk to supply chain partners and investors, it's kind of like if you don't show up with the CEO, it's sort of a slap in the face to them. They're like, are we not important for the CEO to come? But because there's two of them, it's very easy to send one of the CEOs and that's just like, oh, I'm the CEO, I'm here. And so a lot of CEOs have said, oh, I wish I could clone myself and be two places at once. If you have co-CEOs, you can actually be at two places at once. So when they're meeting with investors, when they're meeting with engineering partners, and they're meeting with supply chain partners, then one of the CEOs it's much easier for a CEO to go there. And my suspicion is what's happening is Chris is handling more of the investment side meetings and the finance side meetings. And Steve is handling more of the investment and supply chain partner meetings. And that's I think that's how they're divvying it up. I'm not sure, but that's just kind of the vibe I get. There's always someone to mind the store. So, when someone's out traveling to meet these partners, someone can be at home to make decisions at home, at the home office. Or if someone takes vacation, there's always someone in charge. So there's always someone minding the store. And then there's a lot of decisions that CEOs have to make. As a leader, you have to make lots of decisions. And so it helps to have some more people handling all the kind of the somewhat minor decisions you have to make. And then if you have two of them, when the major decisions have to be made, you can kind of talk it over with someone that you trust. easier to manage multiple product lines. Now, that's not an issue with Aptera, but it is easier to manage different parts of the business. Like again, like they said, someone handles the marketing, finance, and someone handles the engineering, operations, that kind of thing. So you can kind of divide and conquer those kinds of things, and more champions for innovation. So they're just if as long as the people see a united leadership, there's more people that they can cling to. What they mean, one way that they talked about in the podcast is, for example, especially like top C-suite people and like the best engineers, they stay in a company because they feel like they have a good relationship with the CEO. Like if you have a good relationship with the CEO, you feel more invested in the company. And if you have two CEOs, there's twice the number of people that you can feel like you have a good. So like, let's say someone feels like they have a good relationship with Steve or a good relationship with Chris. Then in both cases they have a good relationship with the CEO. Now it can lead to some tribalism if there is some conflict between the two, and there'll be like Steve's people and Chris's people. But I don't see that happening. Of course, I'm not in the company. I don't see the day-to-day workings. As an outside observer, it seems like they have a very good relationship, and that there isn't like this tribalism within the company between the two founders. The founders seem pretty united. And so what I found out from doing this reading and from listening to this podcast is co-CEOs are much more common in startups, because in startups, there's a lot of decisions to be made, a lot of moving parts. There's a lot of work to be done. And usually startups, many of them are founded by more than one person. And then when there's two people that are their founders, they end up being the co-CEOs. That is exactly the case with Aptera. But instead of being like this really rare, crazy thing that I thought only Aptera was doing, it turns out it is a thing that many companies do. And even in large publicly traded companies, co-CEOs on average do better, and significantly better, 40% better in terms of shareholder value than single CEOs, for the multiple reasons that we talked about. So that was something interesting I found out about co-CEOs. I hope that was interesting to you guys. Again, go read the entire Harvard Business Review article, or listen to the podcast on Freakonomics if you're interested in more. I'll link them in the comments below, in the description below. Thanks for watching, guys. Have a great day.